I'm not gonna lie today, team. The resistance dragon was very large. What's the resistance dragon? When you need to do something and you don't want to do it. Typically, the more important the task, the larger the dragon. But we're here and we are slaying the dragon. So let's ride. Okay. Off the top is my own way of processing the podcast and other things that we're up to. So I'm going to touch on learnings, challenges, wins, stats, what we have our eyes on from the last week. I'm going to do this every Sunday. And sometimes I'll include an episode like last week, which is more long form, including some friends of mine, where we, instead of recap the week, we talk about things that are going on in our life. So, for instance, the Vipassana comes up. All right. Learnings from this week. I mean, without a doubt, launching this was just a very raw look into how many people give a shit about what I have to say and what guests have to say. It is such a humbling endeavor. I think very quickly, I knew that it would be like a slow burn, but I've actually been surprised with how many people are tuned in. But looking at your streams on Spotify or YouTube, early days is you just got to look at it with a smile. And the other important point that has been learning for me in this is creating this podcast and these episodes for myself, creating for Luke, and ideally this benefits other people, but without that, this just feels like a complete waste of time. And so this process of learning for me is having guests on that I feel like I'm inspired by personally, or I want to learn from or interested in. Otherwise, like, this just doesn't work. So the creation of At the Table is for myself, and you cannot lose sight of that along the journey. The next learning is what I'll call seasons of life, and balancing putting your head down with family time, social time, making sure that you're staying healthy mentally and physically. And right now, this feeling that I have is like, I don't really want to socialize until like I'm through this chapter of life, which maybe isn't the healthiest, but it's definitely this feeling of going inward and wanting to build versus, I think historically, like, I've enjoyed traveling, I've enjoyed socializing, and because this feels like so raw and like there's so much to do, like when I am out and I am in conversation, I'm a lot of times just thinking about this, and I've been battling whether or not that's okay. And genuinely, to build something, I think it just requires an extreme amount of work, especially early. And balancing that has been something that I've been thinking a lot about. And for me, it's like seasons of life. Like this season and this chapter is about putting my head down and building this in a way that I feel good about. And it's going to take a while, but I don't think it will always look like this. Having seasons, I think, is important. I had a friend last night, after going back and forth in conversation about what this last couple of weeks has felt like, and just like the turbulence of the last year. His thoughts were almost redirecting some of these insights about the perspective I live with day to day to like asking myself, what if success was inevitable, and knowing that it will all work out in your favor? Like, how will your perspective change day to day? And for me, that clarity of just removing the uncertainty helped a lot, actually. And today I woke up, felt a little bit lighter, and removing that uncertainty is like something you can't necessarily do, but is a good reminder of like, one way or another, this is going to work out. It's going to look way different in practice over the long haul than expectations might lead you to believe. But there's this quote from Aubrey Marcus that I heard through Modern Wisdom. Chris Williamson, he relayed it in one of his episodes, but it's always stuck with me because it speaks to that specific thing. When he was accepting an award for, I think, being on New York Times bestseller list, he said the following: "I spent so much of my life terrified of what I was going to become and whether I was going to be right here, right now. God, how much time did I waste, afraid I wasn't going to be right here, right now. If I could change one thing about my whole life, it would be to fear less that I wouldn't get here, the place I was going anyway. I wouldn't change the mistakes and the mishaps. I needed those, but all the constant worry that I wasn't going to make it stole the moment, stole the joy of eating my lunch or smiling or whatever I was doing. Know your mission, have faith you'll get there. Wherever you go, it's going to be all right." That for me just, it feels sometimes like that uncertainty clouds everything. And I'll get to that in a second here. But last learning of this week comes from Founders Podcast. I heard this quote and it resonated a lot. "Mediocrity is invisible until passion shows up and exposes it." It's like you can hide until somebody shows up where their work feels like play and exposes the mediocrity. Challenges for this week. Something I've thought more and more about is this position feels a lot like walking through fog. I've heard this analogy before, but to me, it's really hard to balance delusion that is sometimes required to pursue something in a dream versus realism. And in that fog, knowing how close you are to something and whether or not you're getting the right signals to continue to pursue whatever it is that you are doing. That for me right now, just across the board, has been very present of like seeing stats or seeing signs that should feel good and I should walk away as like feeling like they are good signs. But there's also this realistic approach where sometimes it's like so easy to tap into the inner critic and listen to that voice in my head that's like, this is like financially irresponsible, or there's 1,000 more episodes that you need to do in order to get to that point. Multitasking, another thing that I'm thinking a lot about, focusing on one specific thing in your core competency versus trying a bunch of different things. And this year, I gave myself permission to experiment within the entrepreneurial MBA, if you will, of investing money into myself versus going to get an MBA and trying different things to see what feels good. I think it's easy to have shiny object syndrome where something sounds sexy or interesting, and when you're close or you've just started something and you don't get all the validation that you want, you just start reaching for that next thing and planning for the next thing. Over time, I think for me personally, my plan, again, throw shit at the wall, see what sticks, find that thing that feels like play, but also has something that you can over time master and focus in on that thing. Just how I'm thinking about it. Wins from the week. On on a brighter note, feedback when you are chasing something that you genuinely enjoy and genuinely represents who you are is and feels so much better than if you're chasing something that you think other people want you to chase or you think society will reward you for. Definitely felt that today and this week. So getting texts about people that really resonated with the Vipassana episode, for instance, felt great. Tears were shed, and hopefully people took something away from that in a way that, for me, felt different than other times I've gotten praise for other endeavors in my life where maybe I was wearing a mask that wasn't true to who I am. Other win, guests. We have a lot of exciting ones coming up. There's one in particular at the end of August that we just penciled in who has been, for me, somebody I've looked up to in the world of curation and experiential design. This person is hosting an event that to me is like one of the premier events in the world. And we're creating a little short film before the podcast. So very excited about that. I've also felt this pull towards a docu-series and getting some clarity on that for what it could look like long term. It slowly feels like all these different things are starting to collide. The experiential dinner component with the media, the podcasting, with the short films and the partnerships angle that I feel like we're starting to represent are slowly coming together. And this idea of like adventure dining to me is really, really enticing. So that's going to be a project I think hopefully in the next 12 months we get off the ground. Going to probably need to raise money for it and find the right people to get on board. But like by far for me, like I know I will look back on this episode in particular because it's the first time I'm talking about it publicly as the most important thing I ever do. Alpine's up first. Last win of the week, we got our first no from a guest or a potential guest. So up until this point, guests had been friends or friends of friends. And after we launched, I started outreaching to guests that were outside of my network, and we got our first no, which actually, like, I'm happy to say, brought a smile to my face. It was also a great no. It was somebody that lives in New York who tangentially I was connected to, and yeah, it felt good, ironically. That's important. Last is stats. So this will evolve, admittedly. I'm going to read through some KPIs that I'm personally just keeping tabs on. I don't know if they're the right KPIs for the podcast, but I wanted to let you guys in just to show you, hopefully over time, these numbers grow. Some of them are extremely bare and daunting. But last week, we had 396 streams on Spotify. Our current Spotify count or follower count is 75. My personal Instagram, which is how we're running at the table currently, is 6,617. And I currently have on my YouTube 13 subscribers. Only up from there, baby. So next week, we'll look back, compare growth across these metrics, and probably once I have a better idea of like what the right KPIs are, include some other ones, because these aren't necessarily like, for me, like the long-term KPIs. Eyes on, there's a concept called CloCircle, run by this gal Lauren out of Europe. It's a philosophy club that speaks to the ongoing exchange of thoughts, feelings, and ideas. Their newsletter is top. They send it out once a month, and from what I can understand, they have meetups across the world where somebody within the club hosts, and it's part of this larger agency called CLO. And I've never been, but it seems like they do a really, really good job. And the people, from what I've heard, are very kind. So one to keep tabs on. Last but not least is extra credit. This is one that I've heard several times, is speaking to the hero's journey, and as a way for us to reframe and take a step back from our lives to hopefully give ourselves better perspective. The idea is, if you were the main character in your own movie, watching your movie, what would you and the rest of the audience be screaming at you to do in the movie? We're all on that hero's journey. And for me personally, it's like, run, continue to go, continue to put yourself out there, be vulnerable. The right people will hear it. There's going to be some people that judge it, but more commonly, like, I feel like I'm letting down the walls that I've built up around my ego and sharing on social media, and even just with like strangers, but being like transparent about what's going on in my mind. And so if you want to think about what the audience might be screaming at you if you were the main character and everyone was watching your story up until this point in time right now. That's it. Thanks for listening and watching. We've got a great episode this week. Maya Delugalecki, a friend of mine who founded a concept called Lobster Club, and she does a hell of a job of speaking to building a gallery, and I think it's going to be one that really resonates with potentially a new audience. So we'll see you on the flip side. Happy Sunday. Cheers from New York.